When something goes wrong in security, the first impulse is often to fix what is broken as fast as possible and move on, especially when people are stressed and leadership wants answers. That instinct makes sense because outages, breaches, and control failures create real pain and real risk. But if we only treat the visible problem and never understand why it happened, we silently accept that it can happen again, often in a slightly different way that bypasses the quick fix. Root cause analysis is the practice of learning deeply from an incident so the organization improves, not just recovers. In this lesson, we focus on how to conduct root cause analysis in a way that leads to better controls and real prevention, rather than paperwork, blame, or a list of actions that no one follows. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A root cause analysis starts with a clear definition of what problem you are analyzing, because vague problem statements produce vague fixes. For beginners, it helps to separate symptoms from the actual problem. A symptom might be that a server went down, that an account was misused, or that sensitive data was exposed. The problem statement should describe what happened in a way that is observable, time-bound, and specific enough to measure. For example, instead of saying security failed, you would describe that an unauthorized user accessed a system for a period of time and performed certain actions. You also define the impact in plain terms, such as loss of availability, loss of confidentiality, or loss of integrity, because that impact shapes which controls matter most. Starting with precision is not about being nitpicky. It is about making sure the learning is real and the improvements can be tested. Next, you build a timeline that captures the story of the event from beginning to end, including what was happening before anyone noticed. Many security incidents are discovered late, so the timeline needs to include both the technical sequence and the human sequence. Technical sequence includes changes, alerts, log entries, and system behaviors, while human sequence includes decisions, approvals, handoffs, and communications. A strong timeline is not just a list of times and events. It is an attempt to reconstruct what was known at each moment and what actions were reasonable given that knowledge. This matters because people often judge past decisions using information that was only available later, which is an unfair way to learn. When you treat the timeline as a learning tool rather than a courtroom argument, you get a more accurate picture of where controls and processes truly broke down. Once you have the timeline, you gather evidence. And this is where many root cause efforts become either too shallow or too chaotic. Evidence can include logs, alerts, access records, configuration snapshots, ticket histories, and documented procedures, but it can also include interviews and observations about how work is actually done. A key beginner insight is that written procedures often describe how work is supposed to happen, while reality includes shortcuts, workarounds, and assumptions that developed over time. Root cause analysis needs both views, because the gap between documented intent and actual practice is often where risk lives. Evidence should be collected with care, because evidence that is incomplete or biased will push you toward the wrong cause. At the same time, you should avoid collecting every possible artifact just because it exists. Your goal is to collect what helps explain why the event happened and why existing controls did not stop it. A common mistake is to stop at the first cause that sounds plausible, especially if it points to a single-person mistake. Root cause analysis is not satisfied by answers like someone clicked a bad link or someone forgot to patch. Those may be part of the story, but they are usually not the root. A better question is why the environment allowed that click to become a major incident, or why patching failed as a system, not as an individual. Maybe the organization lacks strong authentication. Maybe administrative privileges are too broad. Maybe monitoring was not tuned. Or maybe patching is blocked by fragile dependencies that have never been addressed. When you push beyond individual errors, you often find that the true cause is a design choice, a missing control, a poorly understood dependency, or a process that encourages unsafe behavior under time pressure. This shift is crucial because preventing recurrence usually requires improving the system, not just reminding people to be careful. One practical way to think about causes is to group them into categories that cover technology, process, and people, and then consider external factors too. Technology causes can include misconfigurations, weak segmentation, insecure defaults, or poor logging. Process causes can include unclear change approval, rushed deployments, missing verification steps, or incomplete asset inventory. People factors can include training gaps, role confusion, fatigue, and communication breakdowns, but also incentives that reward speed over safety. External factors might include vendor issues, upstream outages, or evolving threats that outpace the organization's assumptions. Categorizing causes helps you avoid tunnel vision because incidents rarely have a single cause. Instead, they happen when multiple weaknesses line up at the same time, creating an opening that controls should have closed. It also helps to distinguish between proximate causes and contributing factors. The proximate cause is the immediate condition that allowed the incident to occur, such as a vulnerable service exposed to the internet, a compromised credential, or an unreviewed firewall rule. Contributing factors are the conditions that made the proximate cause likely or made detection slower, such as lack of ownership, incomplete monitoring, or a backlog of unaddressed technical debt. This distinction matters because prevention often lives in the contributing factors, not only in the proximate fix. If you only remove the proximate cause, you might block the exact same pathway, but a similar pathway can open tomorrow. If you improve contributing factors, you reduce the chance of many different incidents. Root cause analysis should produce both kinds of insights: what directly broke and what made it easy for it to break. As you identify causes, you must be careful with language, because language shapes whether the organization will learn or defend itself. Blaming language shuts down learning, while overly gentle language can hide real accountability. The balance is to focus on behaviors and conditions, not character. Instead of saying someone was careless, you describe that the process allowed a risky change to be made without peer review, or that access rights were not aligned with job needs. You can still hold people accountable for following processes, but the analysis should emphasize that secure outcomes are produced by well-designed systems. When people believe the goal is improvement rather than punishment, they are more likely to share uncomfortable details, and those details are often the ones that lead to the most valuable prevention steps. Now comes the part that separates a root cause document from a root cause program: translating causes into control improvements. A control improvement should be connected to a cause and should reduce risk in a measurable way. If the cause was that privileged access was too broad, control improvements might include tighter role design, stronger approvals for privilege changes, and monitoring that highlights abnormal privileged actions. If the cause was that changes were deployed without verification, improvements might include a mandatory validation step or a requirement to demonstrate rollback readiness. If the cause was that monitoring did not alert quickly, improvements might include better logging coverage, better alert thresholds, and clearer escalation paths. The key is that each improvement should either prevent the incident from occurring again, detect it faster, or reduce its impact if it does occur. Improvements that only create more documentation without changing behavior are what people often call paper security, and they rarely help. Control improvements also need to be realistic for the organization's capacity, because prevention does not happen if the fixes never get implemented. This is where prioritization matters, and prioritization should be based on risk reduction, not on what is easiest to do. A quick fix might be useful as a temporary measure, but the analysis should also identify the longer-term improvement that removes the underlying weakness. It can help to design improvements in layers, such as immediate containment actions, short-term hardening, and longer-term redesign of process or architecture. When you propose a change, you should consider the cost, the time, and the operational impact, because controls that disrupt the business too much will be bypassed or resisted. A smart root cause analysis aims for controls that are strong, but also usable and sustainable, so they remain in place even when the incident is no longer fresh in people's minds. Another important part of driving prevention is defining what success looks like for each improvement, because otherwise you cannot tell if risk was reduced. Success criteria can include fewer incidents of the same type, faster detection times, fewer privileged accounts, higher patch compliance, or improved coverage of critical logs. But success is not always a number, especially early on. It can also be the presence of a clear owner, a documented process that reflects real practice, or a completed access review that actually led to changes. For beginners, the key idea is that controls are not just rules. They are mechanisms that should produce outcomes. When you connect improvements to outcomes, you can test whether the control is working rather than assuming it is working because it exists. To keep improvements from drifting into vague recommendations, it is helpful to write them as actions with clear ownership and clear verification. Ownership means someone is responsible for making the change happen, not just agreeing that it should happen. Verification means you can confirm that the change was implemented as intended and is operating in reality. For example, if you recommend better logging, verification might include confirming that key events are being generated, stored, and reviewed, and that alerts are reaching the right people. If you recommend stronger authentication, verification might include confirming that the highest-risk systems enforce that requirement and that exception paths are controlled. Without verification, improvements can become check-the-box tasks that look complete on paper while leaving the underlying weakness unchanged. Root cause analysis should also consider how controls interact, because adding a control in one area can create pressure elsewhere. If you tighten change control too much, teams might avoid formal changes and make risky workarounds. If you restrict access abruptly, people might share accounts or store credentials insecurely to keep work moving. The goal is to improve security while also improving the way work flows, because secure systems are easier to run when responsibilities and guardrails are clear. This is why communication and training can be part of prevention, but they must be tied to specific behaviors and supported by system design. A reminder email about being careful is rarely enough, but a redesigned process that makes the secure action the easy action can be surprisingly effective. A final learning mindset to build is that root cause analysis is not only for major incidents. Smaller failures, near misses, and recurring minor issues often reveal important weaknesses early when fixes are cheaper. If you only learn from disasters, your organization learns slowly and painfully. A mature approach treats recurring issues as signals that controls are not aligned with reality, and it uses root cause thinking to improve steadily. Even in a beginner-friendly environment, you can practice this by asking, what allowed this to happen? What should have stopped it? And what change would make it less likely next time? Over time, this habit builds a culture where prevention is normal, not a special project after something embarrassing happens. The big idea is that learning is itself a security capability, and root cause analysis is one of the tools that turns experience into stronger controls. In the end, root cause analysis that drives control improvements is about transforming an incident from a painful event into a structured lesson that strengthens the whole system. You start with a precise problem statement, build a timeline that respects what was known when, and gather evidence that reflects both the technical facts and the way work is actually done. You push past easy answers that blame individuals and instead uncover the conditions that allowed the failure to grow into real impact. Then you translate causes into practical control improvements with ownership, verification, and measurable outcomes, balancing strength with usability so the changes stick. When done well, root cause analysis reduces repeat incidents, speeds detection, and makes the organization more resilient without drowning it in paperwork.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.